Welcome to Money Matters TV. My name is Paul Mitchell. I'm a commercial banker. I'm your host for this show. I'm joined by my co-host, Jim Lorenzo of Jim Lorenzo Public Relations.
Nice
Jim,
to see you, Paul.
welcome.
As always.
Good to see you again.
So what have you been up to lately?
What I've been up to lately? Well, let's see. Enjoying the weather.
Yeah.
Today's been a nice day. It was pretty cold a little while ago. I like the ups and downs and all.
Yes. So what how have you been getting your news? Have you been going online now more often, or do you follow social media?
I find myself doing that, using a lot of it on my cell phone because I can look at it wherever I am,
sure.
Whatever I'm doing, and have a whole bunch of different things to look at, different ABCs, NBCs, and all kinds of BCs and that type of thing, and like the Huffington Post and all this different type of stuff. You get different perspectives and all. I don't like to watch the videos.
Okay.
I just like to read the news. Well, the videos, when they get noisy and that type of thing. But there's a lot going out there, a lot of different perspectives, and I hear more and more that some of the news is crafted in a certain way. So and so what I'm getting isn't quite as objective as I think I was getting.
That is one of the biggest problems we face, and in the PR side, we're trying to find ways to get stories out there, and sometimes we're at the mercy of outlets that have their own agenda. So how do we get that message out there? So
the other thing is the privacy issue.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm looking at all the social media and stuff, I'm careful about what do I put out there.
Right.
I mean, in my Facebook, I'm pretty limited activity. I like to see my family activity, that type of thing. I follow a few people on Twitter of interest. But I get approached by a lot more.
Sure.
And I get a little nervous at times.
It's interesting because social media has become such a force, especially in my area of practice in public relations. People are now looking at social media as all they need to do for public relations. They don't have to work on a story and work on a message and craft a message. But what we're finding is that in the case of Twitter especially, people are just putting out messages haphazardly and think that that's establishing a good social media presence and helping them do their business.
Who do they think is seeing that Twitter?
You know, that's the thing. You have to be very specific in who you want to reach. So, I have a lot of business-to-business clients, and they think that they need to be on Twitter just so that they can get more business, but their business-to-business targets may not be the right, that might not be the right place to reach them.
Well, as a commercial banker, historically, I dealt with, attorneys, accountants, for referral
professionals,
that type of professionals, and I was always dubious that they would continue to respect me if I was bothering them with social media twits or Twitters or cheeps or tweets. Or things like that. It sounds, unprofessional, these little thingies and stuff. And bothering them as if they have time with their billing by the hour to read my stuff.
I guess it depends on the age group too, the demographic. For one of my clients right now, I'm working on a campaign to improve their image in the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding metropolitan area. And they're concerned about, well, I want younger decision makers to know what I'm doing. And my point to them has been, yes, you should do something on Twitter, but it should be part of all the messaging. So you're not creating a message that's just for Twitter. You're creating a message that can be told in a longer form, whether it's a blog or
so
a
almost
piece.
Pre-crafted, I'll call it.
You
don't just off the top of their head, they come up with some idea. Oh,
exactly.
Well, here we go.
It's a well thought out. It's almost like the old standard of a drip campaign, a drip marketing campaign, but using, I'm going to use a really old example, but the old Burma shave signs.
Oh, I love it, sure.
On the side of the road. So I look at a tweet as, a continuous message, not just 280 characters, but so if you can embed video, you can embed an image, things like that. But on the business-to-business side, I also look at what I'm recommending to this client is emphasis on LinkedIn. Because the business customers, the business-to-business, the professionals that you want to reach, and you can target it much more efficiently. Social media is great, but you have to know how to use it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, and I've told my clients and others this for many years, when we were growing up, you and I were growing up, we were told that if we did something wrong, it would be on your permanent record.
That's right, sure.
And we didn't necessarily believe them in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s because there was no such thing as a permanent record.
Yeah, 50 states, you know.
Right.
How can they track that?
Now there is.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen the situation in Virginia over the last week or so.
Sure.
There's a permanent record. Everything that you've done in your life is now fair game.
Right.
If there's a photo out there, it's going to show up. If there's a tweet out there.
You've used an obscenity somewhere?
Yeah.
Doesn't sound too professional when you're looking for a new job.
Right.
I mean, as a commercial banker making loans to small businesses.
And employers are now looking at applicants' social media past to see if they've done those types of things.
To the extent they can.
Right.
I mean, that's to go back to the privacy
Right.
issue. I mean, I think that my Facebook or whatever is pretty private. Not just observable by anybody.
You'd be amazed, though, at what people can find online.
Yeah.
You know, so the privacy is one thing, but if you really want to be private, don't put it out there.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it. Keep it up here.
I'm starting to say, as a commercial banker, I would typically Google the company, Google the principals, and go through 10 pages worth, looking for stuff
to see what they've.
And even if it wasn't
about.
necessarily nasty, it was like, well, they filed bankruptcy, or they had a tax lien filed against them, or something other, you know, that was not, shall we say, of good credit nature.
Right.
That would become significant. I would take it maybe to my boss and say, look, it sounds interesting and that type of thing, but I just want to point out to you, this is what I found.
And those decisions
Should
are
I go
becoming
forward?
easier to make because there's more of a public record out there.
And one of the 3 C's of credit is character. So even if something happened, isn't necessarily the incident per se, but the reflection upon character. For example, does the applicant disclose that? If you do a Google on me, you might run into such and such. I want to explain ahead of time
Sure.
what you might run into.
That would
be a lot more positive than me finding out on my own.
A lot more proactive on everybody's part is if you do that, and it shows a commitment to the situation.
Transparency and trustworthiness. Exactly. Nobody wants to find out the hard way because if it happened due to one time, I mean, may happen again.
Well, I always say there is no such thing as off the record, and in this day and age, it's more important to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
No such thing as off the record.
And your life changes too. I mean, as a young person, you may be in a casual employment environment and that type of thing, and you might find yourself 30 years maybe running for public office.
God forbid.
And then what? All your casual language and behavior and pictures and whatever.
Be careful when you're crafting your messages.
Put the kibosh.
Yep.
On that
think before you tweet. Think before you post.
Yeah.
If you want to write it out longhand first to see how it's going to turn out,
yeah.
I recommend that as well.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, you know, we have a question.
From one of our viewers. Yes, Rachel Vance in Philadelphia has asked you, what banking laws actually help businesses?
Yes. Well, there is a perception that businesses, the laws, and it regulates and puts the kibosh on business activity and all. Okay, but in actuality, there are a number of laws that have helped businesses over the years, and I can just name 6 of the top ones that come to my mind.
Sure.
And I'll do it chronologically. How about the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank in 1913, the national bank, run by the government, as opposed to all these other little private banks all around the country that some may be good, some may not be so good.
Right.
Why was the Federal Reserve Bank created? In reaction to the bank runs in the prior couple of years, and throughout the previous the history of the country, there were bank runs. Every maybe 10 or 20 years, things like that. So Federal Reserve System, number 1. How about just a few years later, 1933? Gee, after the Depression, why would they? FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Right.
What does that do? That's the government insuring the deposits at banks which are members of the FDIC. And virtually every bank these days, every national bank, is a member of the FDIC. So if you're the businessman and you have $100,000 in the bank and something happens with the bank, you don't lose your deposits.
Right.
Up to a limit. Check was 100,000,
sure.
200,000. So if you have $10 million in the bank, you may be out of luck. That's why you have maybe 10 different bank accounts. And a lot of companies do that, so that's something to consider. How about some other ones? How about Export-Import Bank? A little more exoteric. Not everybody's heard of that. That was 1934. And what does that do? That's the government, the U.S. government, backing, ensuring, if you will, that if a company sends a product to overseas, to another country, exports it, okay? A receivable is created. Well, how does the American company know they're going to get repaid? You know, the laws of different countries are different than the U.S. How do you chase somebody in, in the Ukraine or in Argentina or something like that? Well, the government, through this government program, that receivable will be guaranteed.
Okay.
It's very helpful. And both small businesses and even larger businesses, businesses that sell aircraft abroad, are covered by that program. They've got to go through a process there, but that's a pretty good law in my book to encourage business activity. How about 1953, the creation of the Small Business Administration, SBA. That's aimed at small businesses, not the large businesses. And that definition of what a small business is, varies over the years. It gets a little larger, but it's for entrepreneurs. It's a bank won't make the loan, but with the SBA, it's a government agency backing, guaranteeing most of that loan, 50 to 90%. A bank will go ahead and do it, or the government itself through the SBA will make a direct loan. There's been a great boon for the creation of the growth of small businesses. A further outgrowth of that law was in 1958, the creation of the Small Business Investment Corporation Act, which is governed by the SBA. Now that is really a kind of a quasi venture capital private equity entity, where this SBIC agency will buy bonds issued by the lending or investing company, which monies are used to finance businesses.
Okay.
So if that didn't exist, Federal Express, for example, that's how it got its start.
Right.
Okay. So it's still a very active program, today. And the last one I wanted to cover is the most recent one, October of 2008. 2008, Great Recession. TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program. What did that do? It was a government agency that bought troubled assets, including banks, bank loans, businesses that would otherwise go under because of lack of liquidity. So the government put up the money, lent money to banks, bought stock in banks, other kinds of financing for banks and other businesses that provided liquidity, which helped us get through the Great Recession.
Sure.
So lots of activity there. There's lots of stuff that is a burden to businesses too, and all. But clearly, these are some very, very significant and important regulations and laws that have helped the growth of a business in this country over the years.
Good answers. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So we're now moving along to welcome our featured guest. And our featured guest is Claudia Wert of Wells Fargo Advisors.
Yes.
Claudia,
great
welcome
to meet
to the
you.
show.
Thank
Good to meet
you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Pleasure. Wells Fargo Advisors. You advise people and I guess companies on financial
retirement planning.
Retirement planning.
So actually, the full name of our practice is the Wert Investment Consulting Group of Wells Fargo Advisors, and it was started by my father, Robert Wert, 34 years ago.
Wow.
So way back in 1985, and he has his expertise in private wealth management. And after I graduated from college,
can I just interrupt you for 1 second?
Oh yes.
Because I did forget something. Our viewers send in questions about things they would like us to discuss. And there is a way of doing that, which I'd like to bring to your attention. We have a little clip. This informs you how to send questions into Money Matters TV.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says, Send us your questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our hosts and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, M-O-N-E-Y, -matters, M-A-T-T-E-R-S, TV.com.
It's perfectly fine.
Wert Advisors, so 34 years ago.
Yes, 34 years ago, 1985, he signed up with the company Wheat First Butcher Singer.
Sure.
And that's in Philadelphia. It's now a restaurant.
Right. Yeah.
And we're old Wheaties, and he was bought out. We've been bought out 6 times, and we are with Wells Fargo Advisors now. We're very lucky to be with this company.
Well, it can't get much bigger than Wells Fargo, I guess.
No, it can't.
You're not going to be bought out, I don't think, again, are you?
Oh, hopefully not. So we're very happy with Wells Fargo, and one of the things I really like about them is I'm part of their Associate Financial Advisor program. So Wells Fargo does a great job of investing in the next generation, and so I was hired right out of college as a financial advisor, doing institutional retirement planning, and they really do a fantastic job of nurturing the younger generation. I've been out to St. Louis 2 times already.
Wow.
Yeah, in order to get coaching and further experience.
So I mean, you joined. Let's say you joined last week.
Yes.
What kind of training did you get?
Weeks and weeks of testing, actually. So I went through the program. I went through my Series 7, my 66, my 31, and I just got my insurance license.
Okay, these are all licenses that offer. So if if you're talking to clients, you know that you've got certain certifications, and also that you can be, I'll call it tracked.
Exactly.
So somebody should not be dealing with somebody that doesn't have some of these licenses.
No, in fact, they're not allowed to under the FINRA rules. FINRA is Financial Industry Regulatory Authority.
Doesn't mean that doesn't happen. But they shouldn't. It
shouldn't happen. Actually, that's a topic we're going to get to in a few minutes.
Okay.
Talking about fiduciary status.
Great. So besides you and Father Wert, are there other Werts or other people in the organization, or?
There are other Werts, but none of them are in this organization.
Okay.
So actually, my mother worked with my father when they just started out. She worked for him for free. She was his office manager.
Okay.
And that's a great story. And then she moved out, and we hired a secretary. And so she now homeschools my 2 brothers, who one wants to be a priest and one wants to be an entrepreneur.
Well, fascinating. Well, 30 years ago, there weren't too many women in the brokerage or financial advisor business, were there?
Not particularly.
Oh,
that's expanded very much in recent years.
Now, we were talking before the show, and you had mentioned some of the education, the financial literacy in America, and that was one of your big topics that you've been tackling. If you could tell us about your feelings about financial literacy and how you and your business are helping people get up to speed.
Okay, so that's an interesting question, and I think we have to start out with the idea of what it means to be financially literate. So what does literacy mean to you? Well,
literate being able to read and write, express yourself in a way that other people can understand it, and seems professional, well-educated.
Exactly.
And also being able to comprehend what's in front of you.
That's a perfect definition. And what it means to be financially literate, going on to your definitions, it means to have a firm understanding of personal finance, money, and investing. So it means...
And the jargon.
Exactly.
That's a big deal. Oof, read the newspapers, man.
Oh, you couldn't understand the Wall Street Journal without it. No. So topics that we like to talk about when we're discussing financial literacy include things like Social Security. Do you know how the Social Security system operates? That's a basic piece of information.
Well, if I'm 26 years old, why should I care?
Why should you care? And that's a very good point, but you will need to care. How to write a personal budget, how to balance a checkbook. What's a mortgage? What are the basics of a home loan and a personal line of credit?
And these are things that are not taught in schools.
No, of course not.
Of course not. It should be.
Now, it's one of the interesting aspects of our society, because it's kind of a matter of class and privilege, because the upper class in society does a fantastic job of passing on the idea of financial literacy, and because it's not taught in school, that doesn't necessarily trickle down to other sectors of society.
Wow.
Now, interesting, going along that, what is the exact state of financial literacy in America? Did you know that we actually rank number 14th in the world in terms of financial literacy proficiency?
Wow. Is that good or bad?
Sounds bad to me.
That's actually good.
We're supposed to be number 1 in everything.
Right.
Well, it's good considering the fact that there's over 184 countries.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
But we actually come up right behind Botswana, and we were just beat out by Germany and Canada.
Okay.
Actually, but here's a fascinating statistic, and keep in mind we are number 14 in the world. Only 16.4% of students in the United States have taken any sort of financial literacy training. 16.4%.
I never got any.
I didn't either.
A little bit around the family dining room table. That's about it.
Exactly.
A little bit.
And if it weren't for my parents, I would be completely in the dark.
Yeah.
I mean, my father, being an investment professional, put a large amount of emphasis on it, and my mother, who ran the household and all of our budgeting, taught me from an early age that this was important.
Yeah.
But it's not something you discuss in most households.
Yeah.
So less than 1 in 5 people can consider themselves financially literate. Now, going off that statistic, 76% of millennials consider themselves financially illiterate, which perfectly corresponds with the 1 in 5.
Yeah.
Now, even more troubling, and this is fascinating because it shows the decline of financial literacy in the United States, FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, puts out a test every year. It's a 5-question test. It's very simple. There are 5 questions related to literacy and economics. And every year since 2000, Americans have scored progressively worse on this exam.
Wow.
That's incredible.
And it's just 5 questions.
It's only 5 questions. And this has real-world consequences. 2/3 of the United States population does not have $1,000 to spend on a medical emergency. 2/3 of the United States population. And even more troubling, 77 million Americans, which is 35% of the working population of the United States, has some sort of debt on a creditor file. That's an appalling statistic.
That's too much.
Oh, it's insane.
It's the American way to have debt. Can't buy a house without debt. Nobody's going to save $300,000 to buy a house.
That's true, but I mean that was the basis for how we got into the Great Depression in the first place. But
and the recession in 2008.
And the recession in 2008, everyone was over-leveraged.
Yeah.
And you had the huge housing market. And 2008 is actually fascinating because it was sparked by an over-eagerness to lend, but also government regulation on the pushing banks to lend.
Well, even banks, I started in banking 30-some-odd years ago. And back then, individual bankers such as me would rule upon your creditworthiness and whether it was a good thing to lend you money, a good purpose. For example, a second mortgage on your home? God, no.
Oh, yeah.
It's your most valuable asset. It's criminal.
Oh, exactly.
And never a second mortgage that's a line of credit, you don't even have a purpose for it. You can use it to buy presents or go on a vacation and then pay it back over 25 years. That's crazy. It's unconscionable.
Of course.
And then 10 years later, banks want to expand and stuff. They say, well, we'll do that, we'll do that, we'll do that, we'll do that.
Well, nobody tells people that.
Credit cards, up the gazoo, 10 credit cards and your pockets are filled with credit cards.
Yeah, credit score is another thing that we try to emphasize in financial literacy courses. Also, things about student loans, which is a huge problem blighting the millennial generation. So, getting into specifically how this relates to 401k planning, why should employers care whether or not their employees are financially literate? Why should they care?
And going along with that, I mean, I've talked to employers about so you offer you'll match contributions, that type of thing. What do your employees do? How do you educate your employees to get them interested? Well, some participate, some don't. You can't force them. Yeah,
exactly. So what we're doing is trying to educate the sponsor first on why you should care. So
good approach.
Here's a few fascinating statistics that I brought along because I love statistics.
I can see that.
So the Financial Education for Today's Workforce was a study done in 2016 and included responses from employers in the United States and Canada. And they specifically polled HR managers and benefit specialists. So the results are actually kind of fascinating. 66% of respondents were struggling with debt. 60% were stressed about saving for retirement. 51% were having trouble planning for their child's education. And 48% were struggling to cover basic living expenses.
Wow.
And that's polling from workers both in the US and Canada. And 36% were stressed about paying for medical expenses. And this is fascinating. Another study found that 1 in 5 workers reported feeling extremely stressed, mostly because of the job and finances. Those reporting high levels of stress were 4 times as likely to struggle from symptoms of fatigue, headache, depression, or other ailments. They were more likely to take sick days, increased absenteeism, and decreased productivity by almost 40%.
Terrible. So what are you doing to address these problems?
So this is fascinating, and we haven't seen this attached to a lot of other 401k plans. But what we've implemented is a financial literacy program. So we do a bi-monthly podcast that kind of like this, that addresses some sort of aspect relating to financial literacy. So we did one, the first one we did was actually all about your 401k. What is it? What is the history of the 401k actually, which is kind of fascinating.
Love history.
Right? we went through the whole Ted Benna story. My dad actually met Ted Benna. He has a picture with him. Oh. So we went through
don't know Ted Benna, but
he started the 401k.
The father of the 401k.
The father of the 401k.
Another statistic. I love it.
And so we also went through what is vesting, what does it mean, what are the regulations behind the 401k.
So where would our viewers see this podcast? How would they get the podcast?
Oh, that's kind of an interesting quirk because it's only available to plan participants due to firm regulations, which makes sense.
How about other resources our viewers could access?
Well, we might make public our monthly economic reports that we send to plan participants. It's interesting. We started out by talking to plan participants and said, what do you read on a daily basis in terms of financial education? And a lot of them reported, well, some of them on the higher end read the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times, and on the other hand, nothing. So to remedy that, we've started sending out a monthly economic report. What happened this month? What were the major events? What are some recommendations? How can you address these upcoming issues? And we've had some great responses from it. People have started caring.
So do you have any economic predictions for 2019 that people should be on the lookout for?
That's interesting. We think that Wells Fargo has put out some great research on this, and the Wells Fargo Investment Institute specifically. And what they're saying is that overall financial growth, the growth of the U.S. economy is going to slow in the next year, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're headed for a downturn. It just means that the height of advancement is pulling back somewhat. That doesn't mean that you should stop investing. That doesn't mean you should slow the rate of investment. It just is something to be aware of. The other thing that we think is going to happen is in the fixed income market. The Federal Reserve might not pose as many rate hikes in 2019 as it originally called for.
We'll talk about rates. People are getting 1%, maybe 1.5%. I think there's some 2% savings or CD money available now. Where should somebody put some of that cash to maximize this relatively short-term kind of interest rate return? Do you have any recommendations there?
It's interesting you should say that because we don't necessarily recommend investing just for the short term. We see investing as a long-term aggregate approach.
But there's a balance. Some amount should be in cash.
Oh, of course. And there are some mutual funds that take great advantage of those short-term returns.
Okay. So do you have to offer, we have to wrap up our interview, unfortunately, but do you have any, do you have to offer only Wells Fargo products?
Oh, of course not. In fact, we get this question all the time. In terms of specifically the 401k realm, we have partnership agreements with 11, I believe more than 11, of the major record keeper and third-party advisors.
That's very good. So if somebody wanted to contact you, how would they do that, Claudia?
They could always call me at 610-378-3067 or email me at claudia.c.wert@wellsfargoadvisors.com.
Terrific. Claudia, fascinating. Congratulations on all your great memory, all those statistics. I mean, I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
You are a financial person. I would certainly trust you with my money.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Okay. And that wraps up our show. So just remember that on this show, your money matters.